So you've glued your canopy on, now what? Well, it turns out it's sanding. Lots and lots and lots of sanding. The immediate next step is to get a fillet of epoxy, thickened epoxy, down in this joint where the windscreen meets the skin. Eventually I'm going to want to tape off where exactly I'm going to want glass and epoxy and fiberglass and get a nice line drawn where this whole transition is going to happen and where my frame will go. But for now, I just want to get that epoxy in so it can start to cure. So I'm going to prep just an area immediately outside of this joint and see if I can't squeeze in some glue. It's not immediately obvious. I've been watching a lot of boat building on YouTube, so some of my techniques here largely grabbed from them with the piping bag and the epoxy. But this is a perfect opportunity to utilize some of those skills to make this fillet here around the windshield. So my fillet here, my initial filling thickened epoxy fillet came out really well. It looks great. It's nice and smooth. There's a couple areas that need to be sanded, but this whole band is gonna have to get sanded so that I can start adhering stuff to it. Stuff like epoxy, more epoxy, and fiberglass, and eventually primer. And probably some body filler in there somewhere. Knowing me, a lot of body filler. There are some problem areas in here. One of them's back here. We've got a lot of different pieces of sheet metal and plexiglass and just materials coming together. And then I need to figure out how I can incorporate a lip where the fiberglass will extend past the acrylic here just a little bit and create a seam, a fairing essentially, that extends onto the canopy. This will be sort of a weather seal. This is important. This is huge, in fact, and I kind of just gloss over it. But I had been planning this little junction here for some time. In fact, it's why I went with metal side skirts, because metal side skirts can be thinner than fiberglass ones, and this area is prone to winding up with some thick fiberglass jowls on your plane, and I really didn't want that. And I'd show you pictures of what I mean, but I think that's entirely rude to say I think this is ugly and point at somebody else's plane, but just trust me. It can get fat here, thick with 2 C's, quick if you're not careful. So I've really tried to just make sure that what I wind up with is a single layer of fiberglass that matches the same layer of fiberglass that's going to extend all the way over the windshield and onto the canopy. Will I be able to create said beautiful piece of fiberglass that looks proportionate and smooth and aerodynamic? Well, you'll see momentarily. Keep watching. But that's the idea here. That is the hardest part of all this. The rest of it is really just getting as gentle and nice and smooth of a curve as we can, reinforcing it with epoxy, but figuring out how we can extend this back a little bit is probably the hardest, the most difficult task. It's been about 4 or 5 hours. And it hasn't been a great 4 or 5 hours. This thing's a mess. If I had a time machine, I would use it. Hopefully it has reverse. I would go back in time. I don't know what I would do differently. Probably everything. If it doesn't have reverse, I go way into the future and then I don't know what. Yeah, it's my my only hope at this point is that I can sand my way out of this. That I can tomorrow morning get the peel plag on and just start moving through cloth until I sort of carve something out of this that's usable. What a catastrophe. So in this morning, early this morning, I'd say like all of my worst fears have come true. It's a disaster. It's not that bad. One thing I was happy to see is that everything stayed relatively in place. There's not a lot of drips, runs, any of that. The actual glass work looks pretty good. That said, a whole lot of sanding. I'm pretty sure I glued the canopy to the windscreen, which is a little bit of a problem. The mold release there, not working super well, so I'm having to sneak popsicle sticks in. I expected this to be a little difficult. It is a lot of difficult. Probably a couple hours to get that released. Once that's released, I'll feel a little better. I'm at about hour 3 on the removal effort of this, and I hate to say it, but my mind is now at the point where I'm wondering if I need to contemplate scrapping the skirt and saving the canopy and windscreen. I'm having to wedge things under there with such force. I'm worried that I'm damaging the canopy. Not like cracking, but definitely scraping or marring. Ah, thank God. I'm feeling a lot better. I'm feeling like this is all within reach. It's buried under hours and hours of sanding, but it's there. Once the canopy released, it was like, okay, I can do this. Then it's just a lot of sanding. The idea was always to use tapered thicknesses or varied thicknesses of the strips of the glass to sort of build a taper into this thing. What I found was those smaller strips were nearly impossible to get laid up without just turning into a mess, and so I went with all thick strips because they laid down much easier. The idea being I would sand that taper in later, and that's exactly what I'm gonna have to do. It's a lot of sanding, and you're sanding through layers of cloth, which isn't ideal, but it's where I'm at. think we're at about 14 hours of sanding, roughly. The first hour, not so bad. The last 13, a little rough. All of this could have been avoided with some better strategery around the layup. But as I mentioned, I struggled a little bit with the width of the strips and sort of just went for my flawless paper mache method, which created a lot of bulk in areas I didn't need it. I now have it rough sanded to where I want it. The form looks fantastic. It just took a long time to get there. I'm extraordinarily happy with it. But now we're in the middle of pinhole city. A lot of voids, tons of pinholes. And so my first approach at this is just to do a coat of unthickened dyed epoxy and coat the whole thing. This is allowing me to do two things. One, the shine sort of levels everything out and really allows me to see the true form of this thing, which is helpful. But it's just sort of a scattershot way to fill all these voids and pinholes. More will appear when I go to sand this down. I've accepted that, but this is a good first step. Some of the larger voids, the epoxy alone is not going to cut it, so I added some thickener, and there are a few areas where I've added some thickened epoxy as a start to the final fairing of this thing. I'll get it really close, then we'll start trimming. The back inch here is going to be trimmed off. I gotta figure out how to work this lower line here. And then we'll continue to get this faired and sanded to perfection, at which time I will pull the tape, and that will be exciting. My initial idea, what I think I'm going to do is pull the tape and then set the tape in a new line about 1/8 of an inch, and then hit that 1/8 of an inch and that lip that will have been created by the old tape with some quick sandpaper, and then do my final prime to that inset line. And this will allow for sort of a stepped down technique and a gradual taper into the primer. I'm hopeful that just 1 or 2 coats of primer on this will have it looking much like the rear skirt, which will kind of just hang out that way until paint. This is a lot of work. Days and days of work crammed into this thing, but if there's one spot I want to nail it, this is one of them. I think this will look pretty slick. I think this was a good plan. It seems to have filled a lot of the pinholes. I used a little bit of the thickened mixture to get some of the bigger voids that the epoxy simply couldn't fill on its own. And as an unintended side effect, I am able to really see the form of this thing through the gloss, through the sheen that it has from not having a peel ply or anything on it. And it's allowed me to really assess the form, and I'm very happy with it. In fact, I don't think there is a lot of heavy fairing required at this point. We're getting there in a lot of areas. I'm going to switch to some body filler just to hit some kind of widespread low areas and some of these little divots and pinholes. I'm gonna start measuring out and trimming this thing to final size. First, the big hoop, and then figure out what's going on underneath all this tape over here and how I can get that to a finished presentation. Along the way, we'll continue to fill and sand, and then I'm gonna start pulling all the tape off. I have a couple different lines marked on this thing. Much like this entire process has gone, I'm not gonna overthink it, and I'm just gonna cut it. First, I gotta get some plastic down in here though. This last piece here it's tough, it's precise. I'm having to cut through the fiberglass until I see that bright orange tape and then stop cutting. I think there's 2 layers, but that's how I have to free this lower section from the lip where the top skin comes down, because that's where I want my fiberglass to cease. Well, that's about it. That's all I have in me on this one. That was a long week of working on that thing, but I love how it came out. I love that my garage is back into shape so I can get on to the next thing. However, the next thing right now is to edit some video to get to y'all, because I've been lacking in that, and I can't wait to show some of the progress, which is now weeks behind or weeks ahead. The progress is weeks ahead of the videos, which are behind. Ha! Got it. Nailed it. And so that's what's next. Get a video out for tomorrow. However, next on the plane, what you'll see is getting some odds and ends. I got some interior pieces to work on that will make it even more fun to sit in there. Sometimes I just sit in there and I close the thing up and I just hang out and hide from life inside my cockpit. Aileron trim will be coming up. Lots of odds and ends. I'll soon need to get some more pieces from the finishing kit, control cables and things like that, get those plugged in. Soon we'll be hanging a motor on this thing. I gotta reach out, but I think we're merely weeks away from that thing making its way here to the garage, and that will be exciting, let me tell you. I'll have an episode soon detailing a little bit about the engine and the installation. For now, I gotta run. I gotta get to editing or y'all are gonna kill me. So I'll see you next time. Thanks again.